My first gig, that was a friend of mine. So I came in, it's called Incidentals, which is, by the way, something pretty cool that people can't get in to do if you're not already, because usually having a voice demo is the gatekeeper, I call it, right? You have to have the demo to be able to get the jobs. Incidentals are kind of an in-between between what we call Walla and like a regular character. Walla is the background, right? So if you're in a TV show and you're an extra, it's the same thing as being Walla for voice, right? If the character's in a restaurant, the people come in to do Walla and they're like, oh, what are you having for lunch today? Blah, blah, blah. And their volumes turn way down and they don't get credits, basically, right? So that's Walla. But in the middle, there's incidentals. There are characters, and this happens a lot of video games especially, that only have like 3 lines. They're not going to go out and do a casting call and auditions for somebody who does 3 lines, right? Usually what happens is they'll either use an existing voice actor that's already there that day, right? So when I do scheduling for directing and stuff, I actually do that. I'll look at who's on the schedule. Or they'll bring in some talent that they normally work with. And so I usually have like an incidentals day when I direct. I bring in like my list of, maybe it's my list of actors that didn't get cast for whatever reason, they didn't really match the main characters, but they're my reliable cast people that I'll bring in, or I'll bring in some new people that I want to give a shot to, right? And so this is, so if you know, so you really should know, like if you know directors and things like that, you can ask them, hey, do you need any incidentals? And so that's what I did for Helsing. And I had literally just landed a week before, and I'd only, I'd done film and theater, and I hadn't done any voiceover that I can remember. And so I came in and I just watched Taliesin Jaffe, the director, what he did for some incidentals. Because in Helsing, a lot of people die, so I was literally 30 people getting killed, along with another kind of interesting character who ended up killing himself to avoid being killed by Alucard, the main character, right? And so I learned a lot just by watching him and Jason and seeing how the process worked. And then when they told me to get up and do it, I just did what they did. So film dubbing is very much like animation dubbing. The process is almost identical. It just depends on what company you're working with. But most video games, you are not dubbing them except for cutscenes. So, you played any popular action game or things like that. There's cutscenes that you have lip movements, but otherwise the character's running around, and if you're playing as the character, you don't see the front of their face anyway. A lot of video game lines are what we call wild, where you just say them and you don't have to match mouth movements. So, almost every video game that I've done has been either no dubbing, or there's like a few cutscenes, and then the rest are just, what we call wild, where sometimes there's a time limit. Like I'm a character in Blade and Soul, the MMO. I'm Shundun, like this recurring little tiny dude that comes back in 3-4 expansions. I didn't have to worry about lip flap for him, except for like one cutscene that I did. They have a time limit. It has to be as long as this game's Korean, so it has to be as long as the original Korean. It can't be longer, especially if it's a fighting thing or an attack, right? If they've already done the attack, you can't still be talking, so there's timed performances that aren't necessarily lining up with mouth movements. But in terms of dubbing a film, if you're dubbing it into English from another language or something like that, it's pretty much identical to dubbing animation, where there's you have a cue with 3 beeps, or you have a software that on the screen shows you when to start, and then you try to match up what it is. So so mostly video games are not like the dubbing. It's like a pyramid, right? If you think about it, the low budget stuff is most of the work, and it's probably obvious, right? Because not everybody has lots of money. So low budget's kind of the bottom, then there's sort of medium budgets, and then there's the top, like Disney and stuff like that, right? Most stuff, the big expense is the recording studio and the director and the actors. And so what they want, because the actors, I think, generally are the most expensive thing that you're paying for. And for good reason. they work the least number of hours. Like the director's directing everybody. You know, the engineer, you might have 1 or 2 engineers for the whole project, but they're getting more hours. But some actors come in just for the 2-hour minimum and then they're done. So to save money on these smaller projects, and it's just normal, that's how it's done. You know, even with Citizens of Space, most lead characters had 50 to 60 lines, but that doesn't take 2 hours, at least not the way I do it. And so I cast them in several roles so we could get the most, because they're going to be in their 2-hour minimum anyway, and that's what happens. So when you do the low budget stuff, they want you to be as fast as possible. And so that's why part of my training is to teach you how to be fast. Now, I don't mean talking fast. What I mean by fast is there's no delay between takes where your mind's not wandering and the director's like, hey, go, you know, you go right into your next take and you don't flub. You really have to practice learning how to not flub. And so I have a technique that I teach people to be able to not make flubs. You know, flub is when you're like, oh, I need to, and you don't say the word and you have to start over, right? Enough of those and the director's going to start to get antsy, especially because of the money time limit thing. So those are low budget, which is most of the stuff I've worked on, or maybe medium budget. Still, they try to be that way, though they tend to be a little more relaxed because they know they have money. But then I worked on a higher budget thing, and recently I worked on a movie called Ella Bella Bingo. The director had me come in. It was the last one of the day. And I played it's a kid's show, and I played one of the kids' dads. And he had a handful of lines. He didn't have a lot of lines. But we spent 15, 20 minutes just flushing out the character voice. And normally what happens, let's say when I did Ace Combat, I was in Ace Combat 7. And they cast me based on my audition. Usually what I think that means is I'm going to do the same voice as the audition, right? So that's usually what you think. It's not always what happens. So you come in, and then they were like, oh, okay, he needs to sound different from this guy. And so we tweaked it for like 2 minutes, 3-4 minutes, maybe, whatever. But with Ella Bella Bingo, the bigger budget thing, right? And I'm not saying Ace Combat 7 was low budget. It's more that it has like, I don't know, 50,000 lines or something. So they had to go fast or it would never have gotten done, right? So I think Ace Combat is a higher budget thing. But, you know, if you know what it is, the fighter simulation game, there's so many lines in it, there's no way they could take their time with that. They had to go fast. Anyway, but the LBL Bingo thing, I went in there, we spent 15 minutes at least just refining my character voice that he wanted for Johnny's dad. And then, you know, it was ADR dubbing, but he actually had me do a few free takes first where I didn't match up. He's just like, just do it. Just do the, don't worry about the lip flap. Just give me a read, how the character would sound. And we took our time and developed it. And so it was quite a long session, but I really enjoyed it because it felt more like acting than being a machine. But a lot of times the voice acting people want you to be a machine. So. I don't know too many casting people who haven't done voice acting first, right? So it seems like almost like a prerequisite to actually be a voice actor because you know what things to listen for. And I'm still learning. You know, I had actually Citizen of Space again. I remember there was someone who auditioned and they did an audition with a character. Not talk like this. That was how I. And it sounded great. That's what we wanted for the character. But have you ever tried to talk like this for 2 hours? It doesn't work. So. I learned my lesson that, you know, yeah, maybe someone can do something for an audition, but are they overreaching, right? Are they doing a voice that's so different or so weird from their natural voice that there's no way they're going to be able to continue to do that? And I think you don't know that unless you are a voice actor or you've done some directing for a while. And so, yeah, I get, as a director, like, casting is unusual because in the world of voiceover, depending on the project, the casting director might cast everybody, right? And the director just shows up and directs everybody. Or the director might cast everybody. They might do the job themselves. They might do both. A lot of times, it's sort of both. When I direct, what I do is the main characters of whatever it is, those I have to get approval for the client. So what I do is I'm a filter. I select usually the top 3 for each voice using my experience, right? Because I don't want to waste their time listening to auditions that aren't very good or don't match what they want. So I'll filter the top 3 and send it to the client, and then their casting person or whoever it is, creative director, somebody like that, then they pick out of those 3. So I've done my job, then they cast it. And then like the smaller roles, like I mentioned before, like the incidentals, then usually the director just casts those and brings people in for them. and that's a good. So it's good to know directors, because they can bring people in. And a lot of times, I don't know if you've noticed this. If you imagine these video games, sometimes you run into these incidental characters that have 2 or 3 lines, or even 1 line, like a little character on the street. And the voice is really weird, or it's just not that good. They'll be like, "Yeah, I'm looking for my baseball," or something. And you're like, wow, that's weird. It's probably like what somebody brought in, the director brought in somebody like a friend, or literally if they're in an office, they grabbed the front desk person and said, I need somebody different to do this line. Right. So, but I think that if you want to do directing and casting, it's best to work in acting first. Not that you have to. I'm sure there's plenty of casting directors who don't. But my feeling, there's a feel you get for acting, which is I think also why many directors were also actors first.